This is a exploding barrel for 290. And to make an exploding barrel, uh, I I didn't do the fire explosion part. I just did the breaking part, and you can see the fracture here. But my thought process on creating it uh, requires me to be in the technical view, so I can. It was easier for me because I used a lot of group stuff and attribute stuff here. I started with just a basic tube. Um, I added a I added extra rows and columns so I can have more freedom to do what I want. You can see the lines sort of cut in here or drawn in. Um, Besides that, after that, I put down a point sop and a paint sop. Point sop I used to create a or add color, and I set the color to 0 in all fields, making it black. And then I painted uh, the fields. Let's turn off the visualize pieces and look specifically at this potentially. Oh, well, um, giving me a little bit of a, it's being a little annoying here, but I painted blue, adding blue as my color on multiple faces in sort of an area here on this side of the tube, and created an attribute based off of that. I created the attribute named explode, and I based it off of the value of blue from the previous node, and then I scattered points along that area. If you look here, um, this is much easier to see. There's a bunch of points here that are scattered in the area that was painted. And from there, I made the object into an RBD object so I could use a Voronoi fracture, which is what you see here. And because I scattered points primarily along that painted node area, or that painted area um, from the paint node, I have created a heavy amount of geometry in the painted area and a smaller amount elsewhere of fractured geometry, I should say, um, for the simulation. Because we want to make an exploding barrel, I didn't want the entire barrel to just explode all over the place, like pieces going this way, that way, and all over the place. I'm thinking a barrel is going to have a weak point where it sort of pressure builds up and explodes out in that weak point. And so this side here was the weak point I chose. Um, After that, I assembled the geometry and made made it into a packed primitive, creating packed geometry, rested it, and then I recreated the area again, repainting it, putting a point, putting it black again, repainting it, and created the attribute once again because I had trouble trying to recall the attribute. It wasn't cooperating with me. The attribute gets destroyed in the fracture after the fracture stop because it's creating new geometry. It gets rid of most of the older attributes that aren't associated in the left side here. So because I created it in the right side, it didn't want to work out as well. Um, Theoretically, I could have put these pieces, these nodes here, up here, and it would work out the same. I decided to do it further down in the in the tree though, just because I didn't want uh, I just didn't want to deal with any errors that might come up Perhaps a fracture would destroy the attributes again anyway. So putting it after the rest stop and right before the dop import allows me to make sure for 100%, like 100% sure that uh, the attributes would be exported with the geometry and the fracture into the dop network. So the dop network, I did something a bit different. I created an RBD object and then I switched it over to a packed object, which is understandable because I used an assemble SOP to create packed geometry to make everything run smoother. But I used a multi-solver here because I wanted to use multiple things. Um, I have the rigid body solver that I started out with, and then I used a pop force with a vex expression. And uh, the other than that, it's the same. I deleted the gravity so the thing wouldn't fall. Other than that, it's just a basic dop network. My vex expression I added in is again pretty simple because I made sure that the barrel had the attributes I wanted. It had the explode attribute that I recreated, and here you can see explode in the as one of the attributes that was imported with the geometry. So I was able to just use the vex code or the at explode with this pop force and tell it to have a force of in the x direction of 1, else everything else has a force of 0 everywhere. So only these painted pieces, or these small pieces I suppose, these painted pieces would have a force in a direction. So uh, we can play the simulation. You see only the pieces from that were painted from the previous spot have exploded out. So um, I can expand or contract the region. I can increase the force if I want to. Maybe I want to add a little bit of force in the Y direction. It doesn't matter. But this is at least the destruction part of an exploding barrel. The fire part could also be implemented by just putting, say, like a sphere inside here and just have it simple pyro sim coming out. And maybe it's just a little bit of fire.